Loves. Today we have with us Kate Anthony, host of the New York Times recommended podcast, the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. She's a divorce coach who helps women with children, especially, decide if they should stay in or leave their marriages, and then either helps them heal their relationships or exit with grace. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me, Dawn.
This is our follow-up chat because
Hmm.
I got to be a guest on your podcast. This interview
Yes.
is long overdue for you to be over here.
Yes, I'm excited.
Tell us just a smidgy smidge about like where things are in the world of Kate Land, right? Like,
Mm,
yeah,
mm.
who are you? What are you up to?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I wasn't expecting that. What is going on in my world? I had a rocky few years. I think we've talked about this, like health-wise. I had a really
Mm.
rocky few years, and I am feeling better than I have in many years since like probably 2019-ish. My menopause was rough,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
um, and it was long.
Mm.
My perimenopause was
Mm-hmm.
long
Mm-hmm.
and rough. And, I am back at the gym 4 days a week, hardcore working out, and my hormones are regulated and balanced.
Love.
And I feel better than I have in a really long time. So I'm stoked about that. And my work is really fulfilling. It's really
Mm.
hard. I think it's a hard time to do what we
Mm-hmm.
do in
Mm-hmm.
particular.
Mm-hmm.
There is a sort of there's always a rise before a fall.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the patriarchal,
Mm.
last
Mm-hmm.
grasping at,
Mm-hmm.
it's getting rough. And and I love what I do. I love helping women through their divorces make the decisions that they need to make to get through this as
Mm-hmm.
unscathed as possible, protecting their children.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it's a balance, right? Like the work that I do tends to be pretty intense.
Yeah, for
A
sure.
lot of domestic violence work that I do, unfortunately,
Mm.
and domestic abuse. And so it can be really hard, but I'm just trying to keep balanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what we're all striving for, is just a little
Right.
balance.
Striving. Not
Striving.
necessarily achieving, but we touch it
Striving.
sometimes.
We work.
So
Yep. Yep.
we are
Yep.
so blessed to have you on today because you really have like sort of the foremost podcasts in the divorce space, right? Like you have worked with so many women, you have talked to so many experts, you have such a
Yeah.
wisdom of experience. So I'm really excited for all the things we're going to talk about today.
Thank
All
you.
right. What's a moment in your own life outside of your career
Oh,
that most
okay.
shaped the way that you approach guiding women through divorce and all of their many struggles?
Wow. Okay.
I told you I was going to bring it today.
I know, really. She was like, I have banger questions. And I was like, okay. Turns out, Jesus, okay. These are not on the list of questions I gave you, Dawn.
No,
Uh,
no.
which, by the way, I really love because I'm sick of answering those questions.
Right?
Okay.
That's the thing when you've done this conversation so many
100%.
times. Yeah.
100%. Okay,
Say
so
something
here's
new.
one.
Hmm.
This is one, a huge moment in my life.
Mm.
Was in college,
Ooh.
and I went to school for acting. So I went to an acting conservatory.
I just
And
recently
so,
learned this about you, but have we'd never
oh
talked
yeah.
about it. I can't. Okay,
Yeah,
do
yeah, yeah.
tell. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, anyway, so they had cuts. So basically, like your freshman year, at the end of every semester, they would do cuts, and they would like boot people from the program. So you
Mm.
had to like, every semester
Make the
it got
grade.
smaller and smaller. Like
Hmm.
I think our starting class was maybe like I don't know, 50 people, and then our graduating class was 17. So, you know,
Wow.
but they had to give you a warning the semester before. They couldn't cut you without having given you a warning the semester before. And I had sailed through. I
Mm.
was very talented and I was really good. And so I had sailed through everything. But halfway through my sophomore year in my conference, my professor said to me, "You're a bitch."
Mm.
And I was like,
Come again?
"What?" Because I'm not a bitch, right? At all. And he said, "You have no idea how you come across. You when you talk, you come across as a bitch, and I don't think you mean it.
Mm.
And it was one of the most devastating moments of my entire life
Yes. Wow.
because I was so codependent.
Mm.
All I wanted was for everybody to
Mm-hmm.
like me.
Mm-hmm.
And he was right that the
Mm.
way I communicated was not in alignment with who I really was.
Yeah.
And that I had learned this communication style from my upbringing, from my family of origin, and in particular my mother,
Mm.
who is very cutting
Mm.
and critical, doesn't really mean it.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you call her out on it, she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, you have no idea. And similarly, you have no idea how
Sure.
you come across.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend say about my mother once, all she wants is love. That's all she
Mm-hmm.
wants.
Mm-hmm.
And every tool she uses to get it does the opposite, pushes people
Yeah.
away.
Isn't that
And
wild
that's
how humans do that?
exactly,
Yeah.
yes. And that's exactly what I was doing. And I didn't know it.
Wow.
And I went home from that meeting. I was devastated. I was sobbing.
Mm.
I was like, and then I had to process it
Mm-hmm.
and realize that he was 100% correct.
Shit.
And I had to change. And, from that moment, I think it set me on the path for being the communicator that I am.
No
And I'm
kidding.
known
Mm-hmm.
as an expert communicator.
Mm-hmm.
I went to school, I studied communication. I learned how to communicate because it was so important for me to be authentic in who I was and what I, to portray my intention, right? We always talk about impact versus
Mm-hmm.
intent,
Mm-hmm.
and that impact really does trump intent. I don't
Mm-hmm.
care
Mm-hmm.
how you meant it.
Mm-hmm.
How it came out and how it impacted me was not that.
Mm-hmm. Not congruent. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and so I took that very seriously and I learned how to have those things align. And it's the greatest gift I think anyone ever gave me.
Yeah, well, hot damn, that was quite an answer. You know what's so remarkable to me about that moment is how you went home and came to the realization he was
Yeah.
right. Because
Yeah.
I think that is more the defining moment, right? Is your internal deliberation and your willingness to take your own inventory, which is what so many of us struggle with. And
Totally.
by us, I mean our
Totally.
listeners, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it was like 10 years of like,
Sure.
processing and like having the thing come back at me at a
Hmm.
number of times and realize like, oh, this is me.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
But it was the beginning of a journey that was an incredible gift.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's just so remarkable. You know, that is the thing, right? It's not like you went home and it was all better like 3 weeks later, right? You,
Oh,
okay, I solved
hell
that now.
no.
No, it was years of, yeah, teasing out that
Hmm. Hmm.
communication style.
Yeah. And I do remember probably when I was 28, so almost like, probably like 9 years later, having this sort of like out of body experience, real recognizing that I felt like the world that I had been living in was this box that was
Mm.
created by my mother, this
Hmm.
reality that was
Hmm.
dictated by
Oh,
my
so
mother.
relatable. Hmm.
And that I suddenly popped my head out of the box and went,
There's a whole world out
oh,
here, and I didn't
wow.
realize. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And I get to
Yeah.
choose now. Now I
Mm.
get to choose. But while I was
Hmm.
living inside that box, I had no choice.
Hmm.
But there was something in the work that I was doing, the personal work that I was doing, that had me realize like, oh, wow. This is a box
Hmm.
and I don't have to be in it.
So I found that moment where I realized I had been in the box and poked my head out of the box. I found that moment to be simultaneous. You know that scene from Rapunzel where she's running in the grass and then she freaks out and
Yeah,
Flynn Rider
yeah,
is
yeah,
like, I can't help but seem you're sort of at war with yourself.
yeah. Yeah.
I experienced it that way where I would get really excited and empowered and I'd do something, and then I'd be like, I'm going to
Yeah.
hell. I'm going to hell.
Yeah.
Was it
That's
that way for
right.
you too? Did you feel that inner war also, or was it just like a
I
brave new world?
No, no, it's absolutely terrifying
Yeah.
because as you start stripping, what tends to happen is we strip before we
Mm-hmm.
rebuild,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so in that process of stripping, you're just kind of like naked in the
Mm-hmm.
world without
Mm-hmm.
all the tools that
Mm-hmm.
you've been using up until this
Mm-hmm.
point.
Mm-hmm.
And now you don't have your tools, you don't know who you are. Like,
So
what
well
do I
said.
do now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then you start to rebuild, but there is that period of vulnerability and confusion and terror.
Yeah, I often describe it as like, right, as you're stripping, right, as you're deconstructing the beliefs, you don't have this, what you perceived as a safety net of your belief system underneath of you anymore. So it's just like,
That's
if I
right.
slip off this
Yep,
tightrope, I could just freaking free fall.
that's
Yeah.
right.
And it's not
Absolutely.
true, but that's how it feels. That's how we perceived it. Yeah.
Totally, totally. And sometimes we do free fall, right?
Yeah.
And then we
Yeah.
realize like, oh wait, no,
Oh,
okay, I'm
I'm
okay.
okay.
That's
That's right.
okay. Right. I'm wrong and I'm okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Ooh,
That's a huge one.
so good. So good. Okay,
Yeah.
so sidebar, not a banger question, but like somewhere since we did our first interview, I
hmm
learned that you played a role on, was it Friends? I don't know, something like
Oh
you,
God, no. Grey's
what,
Anatomy.
Grace, oh, what's the difference, Friends? I mean, oh God, don't tell them I said that. Don't tell them I said that. I just mean like both very, very popular shows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me more,
Yeah.
Grey's Anatomy.
Well, I mean, I was an actor for, the first part of my life, I mean, really, it was like the first 30 years because I started as an actor when I was very young on Sesame Street. So
Oh,
the beginning of my career was 5 years on Sesame Street.
okay.
I was forced into retirement at the age of 8. It was a very
Okay.
sad time. Um, and then and then I was an actor. I
Mhm.
grew up in New York City. My parents were
Mhm.
actors. So I was sort of around it all the time. I did my first professional off-Broadway show when I was 11.
Wow.
I just worked and worked, and then I went to college, and then got out, and I worked and worked, and I worked in some television and theater, mostly theater, and some television. And then I moved out to LA, and I, landed a role as a nurse on this new TV show that,
Uh-huh.
was just starting out,
Yeah, nobody knew. Uh-huh.
and then nobody knew. And it was great. I knew Ellen from before. We actually were friends from the dog park, Ellen Pompeo. Um,
Okay.
because it's LA. And
Yes,
so
yes.
this is who you're hanging out in the
That's
dog
right.
park
That's
with,
right.
Deborah Messing. Like
Yeah.
it was a very small little park that we kind of took over
Uh-huh.
in the evenings,
Uh-huh.
and it was it was ridiculous. Um, so yeah, and so I landed this role as this nurse on this show, and I was one of the nurses in the early seasons, like the first 5 seasons, that was actually had stuff to do before they realized that, like, oh, we want the show to center only around the doctors.
Uh-huh.
And so I had a lot of fun stuff. I had this rivalry with Sandra Oh, my
Oh, uh-huh,
character,
uh-huh. I'm gonna
and
have to go
Christina
back and watch it
Yang.
all
Like,
now.
we
Hmm.
had a fight in a bar, and it was fun. It was great. We had a super fun time. And and that was that. And then I got divorced in the
Uh-huh.
towards the end of that reign. I got divorced, and I was like, what do I want to do now?
Hmm.
And I felt done with
Mm,
acting. I felt done with the industry, frankly.
mm, hmm.
And I was leaving an abusive marriage, a emotionally and verbally abusive marriage. And I felt like the entertainment industry is an
Also
abusive
abusive.
relationship
Yeah.
for actors.
Yeah.
And there was something in me that was like, I am not gonna leave this. Like,
One
I am
and stay in
now,
the other. Hmm.
well, I've grown to
Hmm.
be a person who no longer, not tolerates, but it no longer fits.
Hmm.
Like, this is something that no longer fits on me. And
Hmm.
so when I try to be in it, it doesn't fit. It doesn't feel right.
Mm.
And so I didn't want to do it anymore. And look, if I could have continued to do theater, I probably would have, because theater is a much different medium for
Mm-hmm.
actors, and it respects the craft, it respects the
Mm-hmm.
artist,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a family. You just the community and the creativity is an amazing place to be, but you can't do that as a single mom. 'Cause you
Mm-hmm.
can't be
Mm-hmm.
like
No, no, curtain call.
performing at
Yeah.
night,
Mm.
right? Like it doesn't work. So anyway, yeah,
Wow.
that was that. And then I was like, what do
Wow.
I want to do now? And
Yeah.
then I decided I wanted to sort of do this thing called divorce coaching that nobody had ever heard of
At
because
the
this was
time,
in,
yeah.
2009, 10,
Yeah.
11.
We were getting
And
divorced at the same time.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Fun.
yeah.
Hey, divorce bestie.
Hey, baby. Yeah, right. If we had only known,
If
because
we'd
like
only
I didn't
known.
know there was no, we didn't.
That's what
Anyway,
I
yeah.
say, right? Like the things that I teach now, I
Oh
didn't
my
know.
God.
Anyways, yeah.
100%. Well,
Bygone.
also because there was no Instagram, there were no
No,
podcasts,
no,
there was
right.
no,
No.
social media was Facebook, and that was for like reconnecting with your high school friends, and
Yeah.
that was that.
Posting pictures
And
of your
shoot,
food.
yeah, and your kids,
Yeah.
you know.
Wow,
So
that
yeah,
was okay. That was a fun sidebar. That was really, you've had such an interesting magical life. Yeah.
so magical.
Okay. So you are a fierce advocate that gives women permission to be unapologetic about their decisions.
Mhm.
When was the last time you had to give yourself the same permission? And what did it teach you?
Ah,
She strikes again.
God, I know. Jeez, Don. The last time I gave myself a permission to make a difficult decision, I think that it might be to parent my son in the way that he needed, not in
Mm,
the way that everyone
hmm
told me I should.
hmm
Um, some of my biggest parenting regrets
hmm
are when I was doing things that other people were doing because I thought that's what I was supposed to do.
Yes.
And I look back and I'm like, oh God, oh God, oh God. Like it gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Kate, your answer
Um,
gives me chills.
right? Like I have a neurodivergent son
hmm
who spent his life just being battered and traumatized by the education system.
hmm hmm
And, to advocate for him, I had to go up against his dad often.
hmm Let
The
alone the
systems,
system.
right. And we were in pretty understanding systems, but
hmm
like also not, right? Because like there's also the box.
hmm
And, he suffered a lot. And so for me to just be his fiercest ally and advocate and
hmm
go up against, I mean, I still do it with my mother, you
hmm
know,
hmm
um, because he doesn't follow the model, and
Right.
he won't, and he
Right.
can't, and he
Right.
shouldn't. And that's also part of what makes him so brilliant.
hmm
And I, but advocating for him in the face of all of this, you know, lack of understanding, lack of
hmm
education, right? Man, that was a huge one.
Yeah,
Huge one.
it gives me chills because it's something I've been sitting with, especially this year. And
Mm-hmm.
I've recorded some episodes about it, but I'm like all in on homeopathy.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter has a good bit of neurodivergent underlying stuff, and which we've been unwinding as much of it as we can. Even food allergies and the various things,
Yeah.
right, that kids
Yeah.
today have in a system, right, that doesn't accommodate. And so she's had a lot of sick days in school this year, and it's looked not like how everybody else is doing it. And
Yeah.
I actually was like saying to myself at some point, I was like internally gathering letters of reference in case they call Child Protective Services on me, right? Because to swim upstream
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
systems is so
Yep.
nerve-wracking. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
That's
I
right.
ended up sitting with the headmaster like literally maybe a week or two ago. And he was like, "Oh God, what are you talking about? You were well respected." And I was like, "Phew." Like you're saying, like,
Yeah.
pretty like supportive systems, right? But it's not
Yeah.
easy to go against. It's
Mm-mm.
It's one of the
It's
hardest
really
things.
not. And
Yeah.
also the systems don't always work. You know, I was in one of his schools. He had a 504.
Mm,
And I sat at the beginning of the school year, sat with the special education department head, mapped out his 504, and I kept getting every single day I would get calls from the school.
mm,
And it really wasn't, he was, talking out of turn. He
mhm,
was, this, that, and the other, like complaining to me about him. And I'd be
mhm.
like, uh-huh, okay.
Did you follow the
I,
plan?
well, so I was under the assumption that like, I was like, okay, yeah, that's right.
That checks out.
That eventually I blurted out to one of the teachers who called me. I was like, I don't understand. I was like, help me understand this. He has a 504. This is all delineated in the 504. And there was like this dead silence. And she goes, Kate, there's no 504 on file for him.
Mm. Holy shit.
And they were calling me basically
Hmm.
saying, hey, your kid probably, like,
Needs
without
a
saying it,
504. Yeah.
your kid need, like, nobody
Yeah.
was saying it. And I was like, he has a 504. The executive director of the school called, like, they were so terrified because, by the way, they were in violation of his
Hmm.
rights and I
Hmm.
could have sued the
Hmm.
crap out of them.
Hmm.
Um, and all of the teachers at because they would like at pickup, they would be looking at me like I was this,
Mm.
out to lunch mom who just
Out to
didn't
lunch. Hmm.
understand.
Hmm.
And then that day at pickup, every one of the teachers came up to me and they were like, "We had no idea. We had no idea."
Wow.
Yeah, it was right. And it was like, and I went in there and I was like, look, I'm not here to raise hell. I am
Hmm.
here to get my son's accommodations,
Hmm.
like the what he desires and what he needs and what like really what he needs
What he
and what he
needs.
deserves.
Yes.
And oof, man. And learning that communication
Hmm.
stuff that we talked about in the beginning, right? That's how I was able to
Navigate.
uh,
Hmm.
navigate this because I knew now how to say what I needed to say. I knew how to be assertive without being aggressive or,
Hmm.
but I knew how to stand in my own power. And
Hmm.
as a mother, and I
And
think our
get the
kids
needs
give
met.
us that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
no holds barred. If it comes to my kid,
Okay, so
right?
your answer to banger question number two is going to segue brilliantly into number three, which is not going to be so hard anymore.
Okay.
Okay, so for our listeners, right? If the children
Mhm.
of divorced parents grow up internalizing one core value from how
Mm.
their divorcing mothers handled the experience, what would you
Yes.
hope that value would be?
Themselves.
Mm,
That they value themselves, that they are modeled that it's okay to leave something that doesn't work for you,
hmm.
that that we can disagree and
Not
separate,
abandon self.
not abandon ourselves, but also we can disagree and separate and do it in a healthy way with healthy communication, hopefully, right? If that is modeled in one of the biggest upheavals of anyone's life, then like what a great model for
Hmm.
all the other things.
Hmm.
So I want them to have a healthy sense of self. I want them to know that they too get to make choices that are difficult in their lives. That
Hmm.
they too get to center and value their own experience, not in a narcissistic way,
Right, not as a
right?
victim, right? But in an
In
empowered
a
way. And
in an
I can,
empowered
I
way.
will, I
Mm-hmm.
do. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's tops for me.
Yeah. And so you have some secret sauce, right, for how you help your coaching clients step into that, valuing themselves and teaching their children that they're valued. Anything
Hmm.
stand out to you about how you approach that with women?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things that we lose along the way is our connection to our sense of self and who we
Hmm.
are.
Hmm.
And I think there are so many things stacked against us as women right? That
Mm.
we are supposed to sacrifice ourselves. We are supposed to, it doesn't, our happiness doesn't matter. We have to put our kids, above and beyond ourselves. We put our spouses' needs first. We just cater to everybody. And until we hit a wall and we just can't anymore.
Lost. Yeah.
And we're
Yeah.
so lost and we have no idea who we are and we don't even know why, and so reconnecting with that. And also, from a cultural perspective, women's intuition is one of the most
Mm.
powerful things that we
Powerful.
possess.
Mm-hmm.
And it's real.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's actually real.
Mm-hmm.
There are studies that have been done about this, and women's
Mm-hmm.
intuition, we do have
Mm-hmm.
a greater sense of intuition. We
Mm-hmm.
do. Men have better problem solving skills, though that's real too.
Yep.
But our intuition is very strong and important.
It's a gift to the
And
world.
it's a gift. It's what keeps us alive. It's what keeps our children alive. I
It's
mean,
what
when our
nurtures
babies are crying
society. That's right.
and
That's
we
right.
know what it is that's wrong with them because of
Mm-hmm.
our intuition, like
Mm-hmm.
that matters. And it keeps our children alive and it's powerful. And it's also one of the biggest threats to a patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of, entire systems have been developed
Suppress it. Mm-hmm.
to suppress it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the more than $60 billion diet industrial
Oh my
complex
word.
is
Don't get me
designed
started.
around you not having a connection
That's
with
right.
your hunger and fullness cues,
That's right.
right? Every diet you've ever been on has told you that you're not hungry, you're
You
just
can't trust
thirsty,
yourself. Yep. You can't trust
right?
yourself. Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and then we wonder why we have such, rates of obesity and eating disorders and blah, 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 right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So our, so that these systems and then, right. And then we have to buy things in order
Right. Buy
to fix
our
it.
sick solution. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So reconnecting with that
Mm-hmm.
with our intuition, sitting in that quiet space of what do I want? What do I need? How do I need to nurture myself? What
Yeah.
do I need from a partner?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, we lose this in so many aspects. Our sexuality, women's
Mm-hmm.
sexuality is like a whole complex map of like ecstasy and creation and all of this
Preach.
stuff. And we lose touch with it because, for men, it's a different, like they just go in and like wham, 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 and we're done. And I think they're intimidated by our sexuality. They're confused by it. They certainly don't do a whole lot of work to try and
Mm.
understand it.
Mm-mm.
Right. So there, like I said, lots of ways in which we disconnect and we just
Disconnect. Yep.
disconnect and we disconnect.
And become
And so
performative rather than
that's
intuitive. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. And so, look, I think the more that we lean into this intuition and dropping into ourselves, which can
Mm.
be scary and confusing and really hard,
Right.
right?
How often do we get the question, is it anxiety or is it intuition? Right. It is. It's confusing. Yeah. And how do you walk that path
Absolutely.
right. But it takes practice. Yeah.
It takes practice and it takes quiet and it
Mm-hmm.
takes turning
Space. Yeah.
in and space and all of those things. And it is a radical act of rebellion for a
Oh, I
woman
love that.
to do that, right? For
Yes.
us to reconnect with our intuition, we're
Our
going up
power.
against
Our power.
all our
Mm-hmm.
power. We're
Mm-hmm.
going up against all of these systems that were created to shut us down. So yeah, that's our greatest thing that we can for ourselves and then to be able to teach our children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To sit with your kids at dinner and have
That's
them
right.
say, my belly feels full, and to go, okay,
Yeah. Okay. That's right.
okay. It'll
Mm-hmm.
be here when if you're hungry later, I'll save it for you and you can have some more later.
We experience that so much in this family where she'll say she's not hungry or she'll say her stomach hurts and she tends to
Yes.
experience emotions in a somatic complaint, right? So her stomach will ache.
Uh-huh.
And she can now, as a 10-year-old, she can tell you, I have a tummy ache and it's emotional. I have a tummy ache and it's food. She can now tell the
Wow.
difference. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely, right? I mean, look, that's the thing. It's like what a gift you're giving your
Yeah.
daughter.
Yeah.
She can turn inward and go, it's this, not that. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
What Gen X woman can do that?
Yeah. Right. Right.
I don't think any that I
Right.
know of, unless they've spent, you know, decades in meditation or whatever. But,
Right.
it's like to be raised with that.
Yeah.
That's fucking gorgeous.
Valuable. Yeah. So, P.S., you and I just get like all the A pluses on this interview because you already answered now question number 5, which was, I'm just gonna, right, but you've already said it, which is we all love a little rebellion.
Hmm. Hmm.
What's a rebellious act, big or small, you've encouraged someone to take during divorce that
Oh,
they later thanked you for? But this is it, right? The act of rebellion is to reclaim one's power. Do you want to add one, another act of rebellion?
yes. Well, I think, during divorce, it's an act of rebellion for us to fight for what is, well, I think asking, I don't say asking,
Yeah.
saying that you want a divorce and that you are
Dating.
done
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
the
Deciding.
act of rebellion.
Hmm.
Deciding is an act of
Hmm.
rebellion because women don't make decisions. We wait for
Hmm.
little boys to ask us to dance
Guidance.
at the school
Hmm.
dance.
Hmm.
We wait for men to ask us on
On
dates.
a
We wait for
date
men to ask us
to
to
propose.
marry
Mm.
them, right? And then we're like, "Oh, and actually I get to choose." So a woman choosing is a radical act of rebellion as
Mm.
well.
Mm.
Mm, mm.
We're good at this. Okay. You alluded to this earlier, right? Where you didn't allude to it. You talked about it, about loss of identity, right? Loss of sense of
Mhm.
self. And there's so much grief in a divorce process. There's grieving an identity, there's grieving a community, grieving a dream, grieving a relationship, right? Grieving so many things. What's the
Mhm.
most from your experience, right? And this is again, you've talked to so many people over the years. From your experience, what's the most overlooked type of grief in the divorce process?
Oh, yeah. Grieving the loss of the dream,
Mm-hmm.
right? We had a vision
Mm-hmm.
for our lives
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't get that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the grief of the loss of that dream. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that that's overlooked. There's also, I think, the grieving of even if the marriage was terrible,
Mm.
you still get to grieve it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And sometimes we're like, what I hear most often is, I wanted this. Why am I so sad?
Mm-hmm.
I'm the one who
Okay,
wanted
that's
this.
yeah,
Why
that's a
am
sexy
I
answer. Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, because you never wanted this.
No.
No one
You
wanted
wanted
this.
relief. She wanted
You,
relief.
that's right.
She didn't want a divorce. Yeah. So
She didn't
that's
want a
that's
divorce.
yeah.
That's right.
So mm-hmm.
All she wanted was for things to be better. That's
Yeah.
all she wanted.
Yeah.
And that's all we do want is we want, this is why we don't leave, right? The whole thing is, well, why didn't you leave? It was so bad. Why didn't you leave? Because I didn't want to leave. I didn't want
Hope.
the marriage
Right.
to end.
Hope.
I
Yeah.
just wanted the relationship to get better.
Partnership. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
I don't know. What about you? What do you think do you have I feel
I
like
think that's
that's
a
a question
beautiful
you haven't
answer,
answered
right?
for.
Women, I've just really experienced a lot that there are sort of two different divorces, right? There's the woman who got blindsided by the
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right,
Yes.
didn't want it, right? And
Yes.
he asked for it. And then there's the woman, yes, who made that very, very difficult decision. And I think you've hit on that beautiful nuance that I thought I wanted this, right? And I've talked to a lot of women over the years who made a decision and then got wobbly on it for that exact
Yes.
reason because they
That's
didn't
right.
want a divorce, right? They wanted
That's right.
relief and they couldn't
Yep.
find a path to relief. Yeah.
That's
I
right.
think that's
Yes,
beautiful.
exactly. And also, one of the things that becomes so confusing, and I experience this, and I think a lot of people experience this, is when you when you kind of take this is the way my ex-husband put it, and I think it was perfect. I quote him a lot because he has a way of putting things that really works.
Mm.
He said, you know, we started getting along really, really,
Mm.
really well after we decided we were going to get divorced. And
Interesting.
we
That's
fought
not
like cats and
typical.
dogs.
Yeah.
Well, I think it can happen. It may not be typical, but it can happen a lot and I was like, well, should we reconsider this? Like we suddenly we can get along? I mean, if we can actually get along, What are we
Hmm.
doing?
Hmm.
And he said, Kate, we're getting along because we finally took getting our emotional needs met from each other off the table.
Yeah.
Now we know that's a done deal.
Yeah.
We
Took the
can just be
pressure out.
great friends,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And I I think he was right,
Mm.
that I think for the most part he stopped trying to get his bottomless pit of emotional needs met for me. Because I was over it.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. And I was done trying to get him to, treat me like a, you know, valid human being.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, so I think that can be really confusing for people.
I think there's something we've talked about it, right? But there's something else in there about if you chose it, if you're the one that filed, because we know statistically women file more often than
Hmm.
men,
Hmm.
right?
Much, much more often.
Where society says, if you chose this, what are you upset about?
Right. That's right.
And
That's
then
right. Well,
and
you
then it
made your
feels
bed.
like there's less permission or space to grieve, whether it's from
Totally.
family or whoever, right? Like
That's right.
if
Well, if
you
you're so
chose,
upset
you
about
got
it,
they thought this was what you wanted. Yeah.
that's right. That's right.
But
Yes,
it's
totally.
not what any of us wanted. Yeah.
No.
No.
Yeah, this is why you don't take divorce advice from people who have never been divorced or gone through the
There you
process or
go. Yeah. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
is not a professional in it because nobody who's gone through it will ever say to you, "Well, if you're so upset, like if you're so upset, why don't you just like not do it?" Right?
That's
Like
right.
nobody would
Well,
say that.
I have seen plenty of men, bitter men on Facebook say shit like that, but like who have been through divorce, right? And they're just bitter about said divorce. And
Well, there's
they're,
that.
yeah, they'll post it
There's
on
that.
anything, anywhere they can type words.
Listen,
Yeah.
listen, right?
Yeah.
Or the ones who are like, running programs to keep her after she says
Mm.
like they're
Hmm.
divorce busters or something
Hmm.
that are like,
Hmm.
10 steps to get your wife to
Yeah.
not divorce you.
Mm.
Hmm. Yes. 10 steps to coerce
To
a
coerce.
woman
That's
who
right.
has made
Oppress.
choice.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Tell us about your book.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for asking. My book, it's called The D Word, Making the
The D
Ultimate
word. I
Decision
love it.
About Your Marriage.
Hmm.
And it's about making the decision. It's really what I hope it to be is, it says on the back, the D Word is the definitive yet accessible guide for everyone who wants to take control of their lives, either by ending or repairing their marriage. I mean, really, it's about making the decision for women, making the
Mm.
decision. And it's great. It's great. I put everything that I've ever learned or thought into
Gleaned.
this
Yeah.
book. So
Wow. That's
I
saying
tried.
something, Kate.
I tried. I tried. It
So
was a
I would
lot.
imagine that it's a fantastic guide on decision making in general, then.
Yeah, you know what? It probably is. It probably is because it really is about reconnecting with the self,
Self.
right?
Hmm.
Who are you asking? Who's making this decision?
Hmm.
But it's also sort of a feminist manifesto because I
Mm.
really talk about why it's so hard for women to make these decisions, why it's so hard for women to stand in their power. I also break down a lot about abuse, like the different forms of abuse, because I think a lot of people don't realize, like,
That's
oh,
good stuff. Yeah.
that's actually that. Oh, look at that. Oh, like, sexual abuse, right? That there are in 30 states, 30 out of
Still
50.
laws on the books.
It is perfectly legal to rape your wife if you don't
Mm.
have to use physical force.
Hmm.
So if she's
Wow.
asleep,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Wow.
totally fine. She doesn't have to consent to anything legally. So I have a chapter on what if they're an addict or mentally ill?
Mm. Hmm.
What if are they a cheater? Is he a cheater or a sex addict?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the
Hmm. Hmm.
differences between that. And then I go through
Hmm.
like, how does divorce even work? Like because we want to know, right? Like
Hmm.
before we go through it, like, I don't know, like what is it? How does spousal support work? How does child support?
Hmm.
So before you make these decisions, there are a lot of things to consider.
Hmm.
And so I try to lay out as much of that as possible in the book.
So something I think you do particularly well,
Hmm.
and I've always admired, is your capacity to break down, in this sort of feminist context, right? What abuse is, what it looks like, how to stand up to it, how to break that cycle, but not from a place of victimization,
Yeah.
not from a place
Yeah.
of getting stuck in it and letting it
Hmm.
justify
Hmm.
the downward spiral, right? Can you talk a little bit about that from your experience? In the very first opening story, you told us about you got this negative feedback, right? And you took your own inventory and you grew from it, right?
Yeah.
But talk to us just a little bit about, okay, we can define abuse. It's an essential part of breaking free, right?
Yeah.
And being able to trust
Absolutely.
oneself.
Hmm.
How do we
Hmm.
define abuse, name it, identify that that's my lived experience, and then not let it make me smaller, keep me small. Maybe keep me small is better, right?
So it's interesting. I think I think the first step in all of this is actually to acknowledge the victimization
Mm,
because we are so gaslit
hmm
into believing that there's something that we're not doing that's causing it to happen.
hmm hmm
And so I think it's actually really like, so we're like bending ourselves into pretzels. There's like a
hmm
moving
hmm
target and we're constantly
hmm
trying to hit it. Well, if you just, maybe got a boob job, I would be more attracted to you.
hmm
If you lost 15 pounds, I wouldn't have to cheat. It like all of these things. And so we're like, okay, okay, okay. And we're twisting ourselves around. And to abandon that and go, you know what? Actually, there's nothing that I'm doing can stop this, and nothing I'm doing is causing this,
hmm
right? I
hmm
didn't
hmm
cause it. I
hmm
cannot control it.
hmm
And so there's something about acknowledging being a victim that
mm
is actually really empowering because you're
mm
kind of going, oh, wait a minute.
Wait a minute.
I didn't do this.
hmm
I didn't do this. This is being done to me.
hmm
And if I can't stop it, if there is
hmm
nothing I can actually do to like hit that target because it will always move,
hmm It
then
will
that's
always
like
move. Hmm
it will always move.
hmm
Then I actually have then I have essentially I have the power to make it stop by opting out.
But I see so many women go to what's wrong with me that rather
Yes,
than
that's right.
stepping into their power.
Yeah, right. And I also think that's a process, right? I think
It
that's part of
is.
the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
What's wrong with me that I and look, here's what's wrong with you. You were raised in a patriarchy.
To believe that there's something
You
wrong with you. Yeah.
you were
Yeah.
right. You were raised in a society that teaches you to believe there's something always wrong with you
hmm
and that men have more power than women and probably a bunch of your relations. So I believe in twofold, right? I believe that we all have our relationship blueprints that brought us to this point,
hmm
and that we
hmm
can take responsibility for that. We can take responsibility for why do I choose
hmm
these
hmm
people?
hmm
Right? Why do I choose these people?
hmm
Okay, I was raised by an abusive father. My mother was a drug addict. This is not my story. I'm just saying, right?
Yeah. Common
Like
stories. Yeah.
whatever
The
common
thing
stories,
is, yeah.
whatever brought us to this point. And so therefore, I, from my earliest years, conflated love with rejection because the person who
Mm.
was supposed to love me rejected
hmm
me. And so
hmm
I attached those two things in
hmm
my
hmm
infant brain.
So good.
And so as an adult, it is my responsibility to disconnect those things and
Mhm.
go, oh, wait, rejection isn't love. What is
Brilliant.
love?
hmm
What is love,
hmm
truly? This
hmm
is not that.
hmm
And so when we reflect on that, we can take responsibility, right? We can look at that. So, yes, I think the question of, what's wrong with me? If we flip it around a little bit, it's not what's wrong with me, but what happened to me
What happened
that
to me?
I grew up to be the kind of person that would make these choices. And also, by the way, sometimes absolutely nothing.
That's right.
Sometimes
That's right.
abusers love really powerful and awesome people. They're way more fun to bring down.
hmm
So it depends on the type of abuse that you might be experiencing. It depends on the type of relationship conflict, whether there's abuse or not, right? If you are being abused by someone who's more of like a sociopath, absolutely nothing
hmm
because they
hmm
completely masked
hmm
who they were.
Completely.
And they drew you in and it was a whole game. It was a whole con.
Well, and when
And
you
that's not
have
your
a
fault.
yeah, when you have a generations of women who are cut off from their intuition, right? Right. Right.
How am I supposed to recognize those red flags?
Right. So, yes, it
Exactly.
all comes back to that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
does. That's right. And so the power is, okay, how did I get here? How did I get here?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
And so rather than what's wrong with me, how did I get here might give you some kernels and nuggets of power. And as we heal each of those little nuggets that kind of comes up through the process, this relationship stops fitting us.
Yeah.
It just,
That's right.
I remember when we were in couples therapy and our couples therapist, I wanted to go to individual therapy, and our couples therapist said, couple individual therapy kills relationships.
Mm.
And I was like, what? And so I went to individual therapy, and it was through healing my childhood, my
Wow.
wounding, through my infant brain was the leader of the pack.
Right.
I was
Relatable.
a
Yep.
hundred
Yep.
percent in my infant brain all the time.
All the time.
And
Yeah.
through my individual therapy, I learned to get my adult brain online
Mm-hmm.
and my critical thinking and my prefrontal cortex and all of those
Yep.
pieces
Yep.
that were able to discern came online. And then I decided to get a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Did individual therapy kill my marriage?
No. No.
No. Individual
No.
therapy healed me
That's right.
so that my marriage no longer worked for me. And
Right.
I understood why.
Yes. And there are occasions, right, where two people can go through that process together and separately, both, and it
Yeah,
still works.
that's
And
right.
then very often there's one, in my experience, right, working with couples that very often one of them does not want to go to the depths of that sort of transformative process. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think relationships and marriages, long-term relationships, are the most such fertile ground for discovery and growth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if your partner isn't
Into
as
that. Yeah.
invested as you are in that, like I think that necessarily
Mm-hmm.
becomes a deal breaker.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's one of, I don't want to say one of the only, right? Because abuse, obvious, but it's
Huge.
like if you've got someone who's willing to take their own inventory and be in that transformative process, like what can't you tackle, you know?
Right, right. Now, right, I was married to somebody who was really willing to do his inventory. He was a sober person. Had been, doing a lot of his own work for many, many, many years. But he was also, a serial cheater, a love and sex addict,
Well, there's that.
and wasn't doing that work.
Yeah,
So maybe
no,
that's,
that's it. Wasn't
right.
doing that
So
work. That's it.
well, and I always said it was actually that was part of the gaslighting because he would sort of cop to like the front 5% almost. Like he'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
no, 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 that's something I really have to work on. You're right. I'm gonna talk to my therapist about that. I'm gonna talk to my sponsor about that. Like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, that's totally right. And then like that just got him off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
And then the
Mm-hmm.
behaviors would continue.
These deeply rooted. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow.
Anyway,
Wow. Tell our listeners if they want to find you, right? Where would you have them start first? Like start here. Is it with your book, with podcast, something else?
the podcast, the book, those would be great places. There is an audio version of the book because
Ooh. Mhm.
obviously it's not the kind of book that you have on your nightstand when you're married.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if you do, you can put it in a cover.
Mhm.
Although
That's
I have a
clever.
client whose husband saw the fake cover and decided to look
Figured it
what
out.
was under it. So anyway, yeah, everything is on my website. It's kateanthony.com. And the podcast is the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. And that's in all podcast platforms. And the book is anywhere books are sold. And yeah, all the links are on my website, though.
Love it. And we'll put it all in the show notes, obviously.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your wisdom. You are just such a gift to the world and to us, to our listeners. Like, thank you, thank you, thank you for teaching us all how to be the most powerful version of ourselves.
Thank you so much for having me, Dawn. I love talking to you.